Well, what we were saying is that the times are very confusing. We have traditional media, and we have very traditional media, which is the written newspapers. Then we have the broadcasting, which was an advance of technology. But today we have the online media. And the irony is that all have an online version, whether it is the written newspapers, the broadcasting, or the new media. So the idea was this, is that in this very confusing world, and attacks from the extreme right against journalism, the real challenge is how to define what is the truth, what is good journalism, what is good information.
Right.
And we believe that here's where people have gone for the easy ways out. I walk into the house of my son and I ask him for the newspaper, and he laughs at me because he says, no. Here in my mobile phone I get the information I want. I said, but there's a problem with that, is you're seeking information such a specialized way,
yes,
that you lose the global perspective. I said there was nothing, and for us from this different generation, nothing that was more enjoyable than a Sunday edition of a newspaper, when you would go through the books section and you would go through the arts and living in the weekend, and you would go, and it was, or the political comment section. It was fantastic to go to that particular newspaper and be able to enjoy it. Today, people that actually look for news, if they do, will go through such a specialized way. They will go directly to that and forget about the context of the world, and what is the world they live in, and what is happening there, and how are people feeling. This is why I was mentioning the Oxford Dictionary is talking about the post-truth eras, as if we're not seeking the truth anymore. That even doesn't really matter. We go for the gossip. I think this is the irony of the term they were putting. We rather sit down on Facebook or any other platform or social network and say, and I tell my neighbors, this is a very sunny day, it's a beautiful day, I'm walking out with my dog, but they're not reading the relevant information or the relevant analysis of the world, or even of their neighborhood, even of the daily things that are close to them. So
how do you fix this? I mean, given that a lot of this was triggered by technology.
You build critical minds, because I think we're never going to stop the technology, and we're not pretending to. Technology is good. I mean, we learned in the Industrial Revolution that you don't stop the process of change in the world by destroying the technology, destroying the machines. You learn by using them, and using them appropriately. And of course you have to adapt to the time. So I think that this is one of the issues today, is that yes, the internet has many pitfalls, but we prevent the children from falling into them by using it well, by discovering the wealth of information they have, by building knowledge societies from ICTs, and not by engaging in just playing games over the net. And I think in coming to journalism and the safety of journalism, the quality of journalism, it becomes very relevant then to say that we really have to enhance the professional journalism. I don't think it's over. Many people say, well, it's dead because it's not sustainable. People want... I don't think so. I think journalism is something we define by the social role it plays. And a journalist, he or she, is a person that investigates, documents an event, systematizes that information to make it easily accessible and understandable to a particular audience. And I think this is the definition of journalism, and there will always be a need for people to systematize that information to a global audience of different types. This is why we must have the very differentiated journalism, why we talk about diversity and pluralism. We talk about diversity because we need public media that is non-profit, that seeks education or to inform the public, to maintain our culture, our cultural diversity, our linguistic diversity, to enhance our languages and to promote them and protect them. But at the same time, it is good to have private media that innovates and that thinks of new ideas. But it's also very important to have community media that responds to the local. So I remember I had this debate in talking in Central America with some friends, especially from Honduras and the Atlantic coast, which is sort of the African, Africanos Hondureños, the people of African descent, who were living there, and were saying, every time we hear news, they talk about the national news or international news, but no one talks about us, they said. No one gives us the daily news of our town, of the way we live, of what we're doing, of the great successes we have on different areas. No? So for them it was very relevant to have their own radio, their own television, networks at a local level. So in any case, what we're defending is this diversity of media that will satisfy different needs, but with a plurality of ideas, which is the other trend in the world now. Everyone wants to homogenize. We're going into a right-wing mode.
Correct.
It's even happening in
when
Europe.
When you say right-wing, you mean that people want populist governments, or what exactly do you mean?
The populist right-wing move, and I say right-wing because they're going back to the old sort of, I hate to use the terms of fascism or this ideological definitions, but in a way, we're moving to authoritarian regimes. And for me, a right-wing political trend is when it becomes authoritarian, when they want to define the authority of one individual. And I think that we had thought that after the Second World War, those tendencies would never come back again. Well, they're coming back. We have people defending that the race superiority, that we should segregate people by nationality or by religion, that there are religions we should not trust, or that we should stop migrants in the world or see refugees as a threat to our national security. And this is catching ground. This is so you have all these right-wing candidates not necessarily winning elections, but certainly getting higher in the polls and in the results of some of the elections. And why? Because they are provoking, with media, they're provoking fear. It's the oldest trick in the book.
Right.
If you put fear into the hearts of people, if you actually engage with them and tell them things, you bring back the old ghosts that haunt the society, then you can manipulate them very easily, which is happening today.
What about the idea that people want their own truths, that now technology has actually enabled every truth to come out? A comment from Raymond Chiriaco. Thank you, Raymond, for this. He says, people will want to define their own reality, use information around them to support the world they build inside their heads. How do you react?
This is true, but it's dangerous, I think, because we build these realities inside, which are not necessarily too connected to the real reality.
Right.
I was shocked when I discovered that in the Eastern countries in Asia, there had been sort of a program to develop a theoretical relationship with. You had actually a girlfriend or a boyfriend, depending on and you would have supposedly this figure created, and you would develop an affection, and you would exchange letters and exchange, but it was all a fiction. This for me, I mean, by the way, I think that imagination in our mind is something wonderful. This is part of the creativeness of artists. But there's a difference between having a strong imagination and using our imagination. There's a difference from that to create a fictional life.
Yes.
And to try to live a fiction. And I think this can happen very easily. Yes. And in that fiction, this is again the fiction of news, which is not the same as fake news, by the way,
yes,
but
yes.
the fiction of news.
Yeah.
But the people are beginning to use social networks to supposedly inform themselves, but in reality it is gossip. It is just the exchange of perspectives. I think this is, we should look at that. And secondly, the other element of fiction I think that we should be aware of is how much information of ourselves we're uploading on the web, and how much of that is getting into other hands. Because I think there is a trend in the world that we're not looking at is, first of all, every big platform asks us to put all our information into them. And they say it in the contracts that it belongs to them when it's uploaded, and they can do whatever they want. But of course, if you think of it in terms of one person or two people, it doesn't represent much. But if you think of the millions and billions of people that they have registered with basic data, and if you complement that with the circulation of mail they have, people get to know whether they like sort of food that is especially for diets, or whether they're vegetarians, or whether, and all of a sudden you begin get profiling, and you begin getting these advertisements that are targeted to you, which means they're trying to understand you and to analyze you and to dissect you and to put you into squares to measure you. I think this is very dangerous. They're trying to control the world, and information is power, certainly. Right. And I think that we're giving more and more information. There was an expert on cyber issues that gave me an interesting clue. She says that the protocols of data processing are sort of known, and of course they're being breached, and we're losing information because of the breach of privacy, and they're sort of picking up all the information they want. But on top of it, you have the protocol of things that are not defined, that are growing in disorder. So pretty soon, between The mails and the information you effectively upload, but then the other information you give out, like what time are you leaving your home and you lock your house, what time did you start your car, where is the route that the GPS takes you through in your vehicle, what is the temperature you put in your house or in your fridge. Pretty soon they will know everything about you, from your thoughts and your ideas in the mail to your habits in daily life. If you reproduce this by every household in a nation, whoever has this information can eventually control that society. This is, I think, a very big danger for the future of democracy, because it empowers sort of political leaders that want to control population, not that represent them.
I think what's interesting about now is that we're moving into a space where no one knows exactly how the technology will impact democracy. A few days ago, Facebook released it's a special report it did on security, and admitted that several governments around the world actually exploited Facebook to manipulate people. How did you react to that, and what is Facebook's responsibility in a situation like this?
I think it's a big responsibility, because I think these platforms should be, number one, aware of what's being done with their information, but secondly, do they establish agreements with the local government? See, the problem is, in order to operate in a given country, in a given jurisdiction, many countries will say, well, first you have to respect our law. But those laws can be good laws in many countries, but can actually be very authoritarian laws, like, for instance, our laws that can impose a religion, or that can have crimes like blasphemy or defamation applied to everything, or lèse majesté, or many other crimes that violate freedom of expression. And I think this is a very, very dangerous proposition, because then, in order for these big platforms to grow in the world, they will give in to the pressure of different governments. And who knows how much information. I'm not saying that Facebook does this with every government, but by the way, I'm just saying that this is the danger that we fall into, and we really don't know what they're doing with the information. And this is the challenge. I think the only solution for this is to demand policies of transparency. Where is the information stored? People used to think about the cloud, by the way, which is an euphemism to give the idea that everything is up in the air, but this is not true. With the recent agreement in Ireland,
yes.
Where they found all the storage of the information, people discovered that even microscopic information put in digital form needs a physical space to be saved, and that's why they signed the host agreement with Ireland to keep big warehouses of information. Who is handling that? Who has the control of that information? What is being done? Who do they sell it to or give it to?
It's a brave new world. The other problem that we're seeing is that other forces, whether it's government, whether it's propaganda, there's all of these movements that Cambridge Analytica from Britain, for example, actually had an impact on Brexit, on the vote there, that the U.S. elections were manipulated, that in the Philippines people are being manipulated. What advice would you give to citizens? And it's getting dark, so I'll switch the light around while you're responding.
Please.
Please, go ahead.
I think that one of the big problems is the question of the manipulation of fear.
Yes.
People have fears in their life, and they obviously are fearful of many things. And in this fear, you can turn out the switch down here too. They have fears, the one against the wall. No, the one on the wall.
Oh, got it.
There you go.
So
people have many fears, and with the manipulation of these fears, you can control the people. So if you tell them what they have to think, what they have to say, what they have to, in order to overcome these fears, then you will be able to control them. This is why, by the way, national security has become such a big subject. National security is the issue around the world today, because we are provoking everyone to be fearful of foreigners or outsiders or our surrounding, even our closest neighbors as nations become a danger.
So the last point here is going to that. It seems to be exploiting so many governments when they move towards right-wing or authoritarianism. Make it be about the idea of you are either with us or against us. And if you're against us, we'll run after you. There's no middle ground. Do you see that happening around the world, and what can people do about it?
And what's even worse, I would add another element. They try to persuade society that this is the way it should be, that we're doing this in prevention I mean, you're having it in Europe. In Europe, and many countries in Europe are beginning to curtail, or a few countries, I wouldn't say many, but a few countries in Europe are beginning to curtail fundamental freedoms on the basis of protecting traditional values, family values, historical legacy. And I think it ultimately is just simply an excuse to enhance those in power and protect what they're trying to promote. So yes, this is being done by these leaders, but also it is being done with the acquiescence of society.
Well, the last question to wrap up. I mean, so far we're talking about the challenges that are just facing us, right? What threats to journalism, which is what this conference is also about, aside from the conventional threats, if you could, in a short way, tell us the threats that are there and potential solutions ahead.
I would classify the threats in three. You have the physical threats of authoritarian regimes using violence, or of people of power, and that not necessarily politicians in government, but you have in many cases drug lords, organized crime, regional sort of lords that have so much power they feel threatened, and they harass and attack journalists, and sometimes we have the assassinations of journalists. The second one is the political risk, which is being reflected by policies changing in certain governments and legislation. They're limiting the access to information, they're limiting the possibilities, they're establishing crimes on the basis of national security or whatever that will limit or will even provoke fear or self-censorship by the journalists. And the third, which is the one that's normally not discussed, is there's an economic crisis being provoked by the journalists, and there's an economic threat. Traditional journalism is under threat because it is true that the digitalization and the social networks and the digital world that operates supposedly for free, in reality is probably the most profitable business that has ever existed, but when you can access information for free, has provoked that people don't want to pay for legitimate traditional media and research and investigative journalism and professional journalism. So it's becoming more and more difficult to sustain these forms of information. The media has to look for alternatives. There are some interesting examples. For instance, in Texas, there's one newspaper that became a cooperative, established online. They only analyze public policies. They work by subscription, so they are self-sustaining, but they're so good and so efficient in their analysis that no one in the public world can survive without reading them. So they have a sustained readership, and they maintain the quality. Since they are non-profit, they really don't have to go into silly enterprises. They basically use the funds they receive, or for their legitimate salaries, or for reinvestment and developing even further. So there are alternatives. The cooperatives of journalists is one of the alternatives. Others are been used by radio a lot, sort of public-sustained, listener-sustained media. There's many alternatives of this nature that I think we will have to begin searching to finding sustainability.
And Southeast Asia, why are you in Indonesia? Why is World Press Freedom Day in Indonesia?
We try to, every year, change the region of the world. Last year, by the way, it was in Helsinki, and it was a very important reason there because there was a philosopher, a crazy philosopher called Peter Forskal. And this man was a biologist, a scientist really, but he was also a political philosopher of his time. And 250 years ago, this man decided that it was important to have freedom of expression. This was way before anyone talked about human rights. And the reason is because he said if we're looking for the common good, and the state has to guarantee the common good and the public good, we have to engage everyone in the common good, because otherwise we'll never reach it. Now, if we're going to engage all citizens in seeking the common good, we have to let them participate with an informed decision. They have to be informed to participate well. So this means that the common good forces us all to have absolute freedom to inform the public. And this was his global conclusion. He had 12 theses that he circulated as a pamphlet, and he managed to make so much noise that it became law. And Finland in those days was part of Sweden, so it was a Swedish law that was enacted in 1766, which was exactly 250 years ago. Last year, this year is 251. So we were celebrating that was before the U.S. Constitution, for instance, and the independence actually, and before the Constitution. It was before the French Revolution, and it was before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it was a wonderful moment for the world, not very well known. This year we are celebrating in Jakarta because Southeast Asia is a tremendously populated area with a diversity of nations, with very important dynamics here, a changing area very much that has become one of the more powerful regions of the world. China is the second economy of the world. Indonesia is, I think, the 17th economy of the world. Japan must be the 4th or 5th economy of the world. And many of the smaller nations and islands are a diversity of opportunities and intensity, and we felt that it was very important to bring the activity to this region, to give the southeast region of the world the possibility to highlight the importance of freedom of expression. Of course, this region has the same problems as all the other regions, and it's not easy to be a journalist here. Depending on what countries and where, you will suffer more or less persecution. And this, again, is important because this is a multi-stakeholder dialogue. So we're having journalists come from around the region. We have engaged in other parts of the world, especially in Latin America, with the Supreme Courts. We're now training judges on safety of journalists. We would like to do the same here. So we're trying to bring this message to Southeast Asia, to engage the judiciary. We would like to have a regional ombudsman on freedom of expression, as Latin America, Africa, and Europe have. So there's many initiatives happening in Southeast Asia, a very well-organized civil society. I think this is one of the most important elements for us. This region is highly organized with a very strong civil society that deserves to be supported. And part of our ideas here is to support the press and the journalists, but also to support civil society demanding freedom of expression. So these are the reasons to be in Jakarta.
What advice would you give to the journalists who are out there now who continue to speak truth to power, and yet, as we've seen in some of our societies, there's an organized campaign to actually attack the journalists themselves in the virtual world and
in the physical world too.
In the physical world, try to stifle that kind of real reporting. What advice would you give them? Us.
I think we need to take several lessons. One is, I think we have, number one is journalism tends to be sometimes of a lonely profession. We all have our points of view. We all like to write alone. We like to make our own comments and speak our own mind. All this is good, but this does not take away from the need of solidarity and support. We must build associations. We must build solidarity amongst ourselves. In the commercial world, I think people got used to competing. One media competes against another. I think this is very bad. You may compete for readership, or you may be competing economically, but that should not translate into a personal competition. I think would be very bad. I think journalists have to find a sense of solidarity and a strength in a common struggle. That's one element. Secondly, I think we have to build on the need that states now have of legitimacy. The world of today demands that states act as democracies, at least, and present themselves as democracies. And freedom of expression is probably the first freedom they have to guarantee, and this is followed by freedom of the press. So this is the moment to collectively demand that, and to include civil society organizations in this, to build partnerships with civil society and with members of government or parliament, if one can speak to them and find. And finally, I think is to try to establish mechanisms. We are here as part of the UN Plan of Action for Safety of Journalists. UNESCO is the coordinating force, but the idea is how to build a safety mechanism in every single country of the world. We now recognize that in the 2030 Agenda, Goal 16 established the obligation of all states to guarantee public access to information. And on the basis of that goal, which was agreed by consensus, we can now legitimately go to every single state authorities and say, the same way you agreed on this goal, now we must agree on implementing public access by guaranteeing freedom of the press and safety of journalists, and having a specific mechanism of safety in every country. So I think there's a series of steps to be taken and to be moved. The most important issue is don't stay put, don't move.
Fantastic. So there are minor victories. I particularly have a lot of misogynistic attacks in the last few days, and just a short while ago, the Armed Forces Chief of Staff actually publicly apologized for men in uniform who took part in these attacks against women and against journalists. So minor victories.
This is a very important victory, because to get the armed forces to make a statement like that and to make a recognition, I think, is a major success, and should be taken by women in the Philippines as really a very successful step. I think there is a rise in harassment and sexual harassment and accosting of women around the world, and I think we must stand up, women and men, to defeat this. And I think this is a very bad exercise that has to be stopped immediately, and I think we must raise our voices.
Interesting is it was triggered by fake news. And so I know you've got to go, so let me just quickly. Raymond Chiriaco, hope can overcome fear. Fear tactics have successfully justified government spending towards weaponry and warfare rather than humanitarian welfare, and provide for the highest standards of quality of living that we could actually afford. Trillions could be finally diverted towards basic needs. So he's pushing for that. Another comment from Popoy Love. My opinion, don't go beyond your freedom as a journalist, and every ethnic race has their own understanding in the sensitivity of an issue, cultural issues. Frank, your last thoughts. There's one more here. Stephen Bagging, he reacted to security issues of online and social media is that you're already being profiled and your personal information will be for sale online. They're listening. Your thoughts, your final words on this for us in the Philippines.
Well, I certainly believe that I am probably being profiled. I have no doubt about that. But what's important is that we all understand that this is a danger that is happening today, and that we can put a stop to that. Those that are establishing the regulations and the rules of concessions on these issues should understand that the information of individuals as a private basis, first of all, should not be breached, and secondly, should not be sold out. And maybe one last word for the journalists. I was telling a group of young students of journalism that I met here in Jakarta, which was a very interesting meeting, that precisely today that I was mentioning that we're now insisting on young people doing journalism, and I was quoting that the UNESCO Constitution has a very beautiful poetic phrase that said that UNESCO was established to build peace in the world by facilitating the free flow of ideas and knowledge between peoples of the world. It means that peace in big part is based on this free flow of ideas and knowledge. It means that communicators, those that facilitate this free flow of knowledge, are those that are building peace. So today we can clearly argue that journalists are also peacemakers.
I love it. Thank you. Frank, thanks so much. Guys, stay tuned. We're going to bring World Press Freedom Day for you in the coming days. Maria Ressa, thanks for joining us.